Hello and welcome to today's SI video. We're going to be doing another video on transporters, this time going over some examples of specific drug-drug interactions mediated by transporters. So if you recall, if we have our cell, we have membranes on both sides, we have our apical and our basolateral. On the basolateral side, it's always going to be the blood down here, and a lumen on the apical side. And this can be the gut lumen, where your food is, the bile duct in the liver, or in the kidneys, what is eventually going to become urine. And so our first example, we're going to talk about transporters in the gut. And we're going to talk about an interaction mediated between digoxin and inhibitors of PGP. So let's go ahead and say this is PGP. So that's two transporters there. And we have our digoxin out here. And digoxin is a pretty narrow therapeutic index. You might not know yet, but it's a cardiac glycoside that is used to treat heart problems, and high concentrations of it can lead to fatal toxicity. So normally, what would happen is, as it enters the cell, some of it would come in, but much of it would reach PGP and be PGP and be exported using ATP. ATP is hydrolyzed to export it. However, there are certain drugs, like certain PPIs, that can inhibit P-glycoprotein competitively. But so as that happens, you have your drug molecule out here, and it is no longer exported. So you have more that can enter the cell. From there, it enters the blood, and your concentrations go up, which can lead to toxicity. Let me clear this off to go over our next example. Thank you for being patient. So now, let's look at the liver. All right, so this is a hepatocyte. And now our apical side is going to be the bile, and the basolateral side will still be the blood. And so now our drug molecule will already be in the body. In this case, we're going to talk about atorvastatin. So we have our drug molecule out here, and we'll call this atorvastatin. And here on the basolateral side, we have a transporter, SLCO1B1, which is also known as OATPB1B1, that is responsible for the uptake of atorvastatin into liver cells, where it can either be metabolized and excreted. So here it is cleared from the body. Clearance. And in this case, we can talk about a genetic polymorphism that results in a defunct copy of SLCO1B1. So people with this polymorphism have lower levels. If they're heterozygotes, they have half as much. So we'll call that pharmacogenetic inhibition. And if that happens, then atorvastatin can't get into the hepatocytes as much, and so much more of it remains in the blood, which increases concentrations and leads to toxicity. Clear this off so I can go over our third example. While I'm doing that, just of note, in this case, in the case of atorvastatin, people with that polymorphism, you can either use a different statin that doesn't depend as much on SLCO1B1 for clearance, or you can use a reduced dose. Just a little cleaner. Okay. And in our last example, we're going to look at the kidney. This is now a kidney cell, and that means that this is still the blood down here. And this lumen up here is now the urine. So I'll cross these out. We're looking at the urine now, which of course is going to leave the body and be cleared. So we start out with our drug in the blood, and in this case, we're going to look at metformin, which, as you know, is a pretty common medication. And the transporter we're going to look at is MATE1, which is an organic cation transport. So this is an OCT, an OCT, an organic cation transport. And if you recall, cations have a positive charge. And so this one is relies on secondary transport, so it uses a gradient. Metformin enters the cell through other mechanisms, and then to get into the urine, it is co-transported out. It is exchanged, actually, for a hydrogen ion. So some hydrogen ions are excreted into the urine normally, and so this one uses a hydrogen ion back in, and remember, this is positively charged, it's a cation transporter. So you're exchanging one hydrogen ion for one molecule of metformin, and this allows the electric balance to remain neutral. In the previous video, we talked about secondary active transport that relies on a gradient. We used the example of sodium as a symport, meaning it's going the same direction. That can also occur as an antiporter, in this case, where they go in opposite directions. So hydrogen ions are brought back in, and metformin is excreted. And then in this case, cimetidine is a pretty potent inhibitor of MATE1. And so when that happens, our metformin can no longer exit. It stays in here, prevents this from happening, so you end up with more in the blood, and that, again, leads to toxicity. One note is that in all these examples, we talked about toxicity. However, in the gut, there are also uptake transporters. So blockade of those will lead to decreased concentrations, which will not lead to toxicity, but reduced therapeutic effect. All right, and that is all we have for today. Thank you.